If you've been following VisualPolitik for a long time, you already know that Argentina is in dire straits and they need to ask for loans from international investors. In these cases, the usual procedure is to print what we call a debt bond. This is a piece of paper that says, if you give me this amount of money, I'll give it back to you in, say, 10 years with some interest. So far, so good, but let's imagine this situation. Let's say that you lend 3,000 Argentinian pesos to the Argentinian government. At the time we're making this video, the summer of 2018, those 3,000 pesos equal $100 American. But what would happen in the year 2028? Well, the thing is, we just don't know, but the chances are the Argentinian currency will have been devalued more and more. By then, maybe 3,000 pesos wouldn't even buy you a bag of Doritos. This is why international investors, smart as they are, say to Argentina, wait a minute, dude. I will lend you the money, but you gotta denominate that debt in dollars, man. American dollars, not your funky dollars. This way, I give you $300 and you give me back $300 plus interest. Got it? Yeah, my dear viewer, this is how an investor protects himself from would-be devaluations. But hold on a second here, because we're not just talking about Argentina here. In fact, most of the world's countries choose the greenback as the currency in which they issue their notes. And this is why you can read headlines like this in every financial newspaper.
The Mexican government will issue bonds denominated in US dollars to be repaid in 10 years.
As you can imagine, we're not just talking about governments here. For example, anytime Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company, wants to sell their dinosaur juice to, say, India, they'll say something like, whoa, hold on a minute, dude. What are these? I don't even know how much these coins are worth. Dude, you gotta pay in dollars, my man, American dollars, because that is a currency I can trust.
This explains why 60% of all foreign currency reserves around the world are held in dollars. There are over $1.67 trillion in circulation around the world. More than half of them are outside the United States. There is no international law that says that the dollar must be used as the global reference, but most people trust the dollar as the currency for international trade.
And here comes the big question. What is this used for? How does America benefit from having their currency circulating all over the place? Well, it kind of depends. If you're a company or a regular citizen, this is completely irrelevant for you. Arguably, we could say it's actually worse. But if you are the American government, well, you're having a good time. So why having a good time? Well, let me explain.
A fistful of dollars.
We've told you 1,000 times here at VisualPolitik, the worst thing that can happen to a currency is hyperinflation. This means that all of a sudden prices go absolutely sky high. But how is hyperinflation created in the first place? You know the answer to this. In most cases, this is a 100% monetary phenomenon. If a central bank starts printing money like there's no tomorrow, the currency devalues. But why is this? What's the connection between printing money and losing the value of that money? You see, when we talk about currency, we have to consider it just like any other product. Yep, you heard that right. Currencies work under the same principles as oil or oranges or mobile phones. And that, of course, is supply and demand. For example, the Venezuelan bolivar has very little demand. Only Venezuelans use it. So when the Central Bank of Venezuela prints a ton of bolivars, this expands the supply of the currency and the price falls. This means that the currency devalues. Nonetheless, the demand for the American dollar, it doesn't stop growing. Everybody around the globe uses it for international trade. This means that the Federal Reserve has a huge margin to print money before risking any sort of devaluation. And now you might be wondering, well, why would the Federal Reserve want to print more money? Alright, so let's have a look at an example. Imagine you've lent $100 to the American government, and now you want them to pay you back. So you go to the American government, and they essentially tell you, sure man, I got your money, how much is it? $100? No problem, dude. Just go to that building, the one next door, it's a big Federal Reserve on the outside. Go in there and tell them to print you $100, and they'll whip it out in just a second. No worries. This process is called monetizing debt, and when you tell things like this to your smart-ass friend, the one who thinks he's an expert in geopolitics, he will have no idea what you're talking about. But the truth is that this hegemonic currency is what allows America to issue more and more debt and do it more easily than any other country. And this is why it is so normal to find headlines like this one.
America's debt crisis is coming. Interest payments will hit $1 trillion a year.
Having such a big debt is not really great news for American taxpayers. In this previous video, we told you exactly why. But hold on a second, because I can probably guess what you're thinking right now. You're probably thinking, well, is America as irresponsible with its monetary policy as Argentina or Venezuela? And the answer to that is, well, absolutely not. You see, all the central banks print new bills year after year, and not only do they print it, but they generate more money electronically as well. The difference is just on the proportions. On this chart, you can see the increase of the monetary supply, what we call the M2 indicator of the American Federal Reserve. As you can see, the number of dollars grows year after year, but what happens if we compare it with, say, the Argentinian peso? Well, you can see the difference. And what happens when we compare it with the Venezuelan bolivar? Well, no need to comment here. In just 9 years, Venezuela has multiplied their monetary supply by 100. But America, they've not even doubled it. And now for a bonus fact. While making this chart, we decided not to include the year 2018 because otherwise the yellow part would just cover everything. This year, the Central Bank of Venezuela has multiplied their monetary supply by 4,000. And this is why the American dollar is the most used currency on the planet, and that's because it's stable. While other central banks print money like crazy, the Federal Reserve is actually pretty responsible. And now you might be wondering, well, what about other currencies like the Swiss franc or the British pound? I mean, if there's one stable currency in the world, right, it's got to be the Swiss franc. Yeah? Well, you're right. In fact, pay attention to this part of the video because this is going to surprise you. Despite the dollar's importance, it is not the only reserve currency on the planet. Far from it, in fact. So check this out.
A multi-currency world.
We said it at the beginning of this video. 60% of the foreign currency reserves are held in greenbacks. But, well, what about the other 40%?
The second most used currency in the world as a reserve currency is the euro, which represents about 20% of global foreign currency reserves. After that follows the Japanese yen and the sterling pound. But these are not the only currencies used as reserve currencies. Many central banks also hold Australian dollars or even Swiss francs as reserves.
But the question here is, if what you need for a currency to have a high demand is to be stable, why don't we use Swiss francs as much as we use dollars? And the answer simply is because there are way less Swiss francs. Think about it. Switzerland has 8.5 million inhabitants. The United States, they got 300 million. This means that the Swiss National Bank doesn't need to issue as many bills. Remember how I said that the world has $1.67 trillion in it? Well, the Swiss franc doesn't even have a single trillion. This means that it's harder to find francs than it is to find dollars to do a transaction. On the other hand, America is the world's biggest market. This means that thousands of companies from all over the world sell their products here. So imagine you're an Australian company and you're selling mobile phones in New York. How do they pay you? Well, of course, they'll be paying you with American dollars. So what do you then do with those greenbacks? Well, you change them to your local currency. So now who will have the American cash? Well, of course, that would be the Australian bank where you made the exchange. In other words, the more America trades with the world, the more dollars will circulate around the globe. This is a currency that is stable, abundant, and supported by the biggest economy. Decades ago, no other currency could be a match for the greenback, but As you know, the world is certainly changing. And at this point, you can probably see where I'm going with this video. At the beginning of this video, I asked you, is it possible that the dollar will lose their hegemony, or at least be less important than it is today? And the answer to that, well, absolutely.
As US trumpets America first, the rest of the world is moving on.
We've been telling you week after week here on VisualPolitik that Donald Trump wants to protect America from international trade. His first move was to cancel the free trade agreements with the EU and Asia. After this, he introduced tariffs to steel, so companies like Harley-Davidson are leaving the country. Trump has also announced that he wants to end NAFTA, which is the trade agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico. In other words, Trump's America wants to isolate itself from the international market. So, well, what does all of this mean? Well, it means that these other countries will have less dollars, and you've got to add other news like this into the mix.
Europe's central banks are starting to replace dollar reserves with the yuan.
Or maybe this other one.
Russia plans yuan bond sale with sanctions threat nearing.
It is true that the Chinese yuan used to be almost an unknown currency in the international market. It was only used inside of China. Nonetheless, in recent years, some central banks are starting to buy it. But, of course, this doesn't mean that banks will start changing all of their dollars to this currency overnight. In fact, there are many things we don't know about the Chinese currency. Things that your friends, the smart-ass, probably won't know about either. But don't worry, because in the following weeks, we're going to be doing a continuation on this video. So please don't forget to subscribe to VisualPolitik and click on the bell icon so you don't miss any posts. So meanwhile, here we have some questions for you. Do you think the dollar can maintain its hegemony in the following decade? And if not, what other currency do you think should substitute it? Maybe the yuan, maybe the euro, perhaps Bitcoin? Well, leave your answer in the comment section below. And please don't forget to visit our friends from the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear more of my lovely voice, don't forget to check out the Reconsider podcast at reconsidermedia.com. Reconsider is a podcast that challenges you to reconsider your views by providing context, but we don't do the thinking for you.